Farhan, there's a million things to talk about, but let's start in the NFL. About an hour before the show, I saw on Twitter that Micah Parsons has requested a trade from the Dallas Cowboys. Is this rumor? A lot of his fellow teammates are supporting him. Does Micah really want out of Jerry World? Is it all done for the Cowboys and the season hasn't even started?
Well, I don't think it's done yet. And you know, I was there when this whole thing began in the early stages of Cowboys camp. I got there the day after Jerry Jones talked and was there for the day that Micah Parsons talked. And, you know, you can tell he was getting pretty annoyed and irritated at this. This isn't new, right? This began a year ago. And if you're Jerry Jones, you could have got this done for last year for $35 million a year. Now the starting price is going to be 41, given what the marketplace is for, you know, the best defensive player in the league, right? Or somebody who could certainly make that claim. And, you know, when Jones says his name wrong, Michael Parson or whatever he called him, and he just refuses to engage with his agent. You know, I think there's a bit of wariness from everybody, right? You saw the CD Lamb comments saying that, you know, it's every year we're going through this drama, pay the man what he deserves. And I think they all feel that way, right? CD said that the day we were there as well, that he supports him. He thinks he should get paid. And, you know, the fact that he's there speaks volumes. So I think he's tired of it. Do I think it's going to get resolved? And do I think it's going to get done? Yep. And I think this was the next lever that Parsons needed to play. And hopefully they're not dumb enough to let him walk away. They say they're not going to trade him. You know, they've got club control for a while because it's not just you can let him play under the terms of his final year of his contract now. You could franchise him later. So, you know, he doesn't have leverage from that standpoint. But when you make comments like this about wanting to be traded, and if you choose not to play, I mean, see where it goes.
Especially since the Cowboys are in the NFC East, and they don't have a talent-rich roster like the Eagles. Although the Eagles lost some players in free agency, if you lose a Micah Parsons, really, what do you have left on that Dallas defense?
Yeah, not much at all. You know, and Trayvon Diggs is not going to be available for the start of the season, right? Because he's still dealing with recovery from an injury. And you needed Micah Parsons. You had questions in other spots throughout that defense. So he was the one game changer there. And it's just going to put so much more pressure on Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb. And now George Pickens is there to kind of balance out the receiving core. But this was a roster that had holes to begin with. And now you potentially put this in play because, you know, when we were there, it was clear that Parsons didn't even want to hold in, let alone hold out, right? Like, you know, they were talking about back tightness as to why he wasn't doing team drills yet, but it seemed pretty legitimate. I mean, he had said that when he was healthy, he was going to practice. Now, I think all bets are off, right? He hasn't practiced yet, and even when the tightness gets resolved, I can't imagine that he will, given where this has gone. But yeah, look, I would imagine more players and more agents are going to start putting pressure on Jerry Jones to get this done.
We're a week into NFL training camp. Last night, the Hall of Fame game, Canton, Ohio. Chargers beat the Lions 34-7. Wasn't close. And NFL preseason, it's so hard to get a read on who's doing what. But Trey Lance went 13 for 20, threw a couple of touchdowns. Do you think, now keep in mind, Justin Herbert is the starter unless something drastically happens and he's hurt. But for Trey Lance, do you need to keep showing that, yes, I'm still that guy that everybody thought of when I got drafted really high?
Yeah, you've got to stay in the conversation because I think this is his last chance, right? Like next stop CFL potentially, because it's been a minute now, right? You know, who knows if he would come to the CFL, but I'm just talking about in terms of running out of chances in the NFL because this isn't his first rodeo now, right? He's on team at least 3. And when I was at camp, he was inaccurate regularly, just like he was last year when I saw him at training camp, inaccurate regularly. So now he's competing with Taylor Heineke for the backup job, right? And, you know, Lance still has a ceiling. And, you know, whether or not he ever realizes that in Dallas or whether or not he can put himself in a good position to go somewhere else and maybe get a Sam Darnold situation or a Mac Jones situation or what have you. And even in Dallas, Dak Prescott's got a history of injuries, right? So, you know, if you can get ahead of Taylor Heineke and get into that number 2 job, that's a huge step for him right now. And that was the best I've seen him look in any NFL opportunity, regular season, preseason, or practice. I haven't seen him look that good before.
In your opinion, is Harbaugh the right guy to be coaching Justin Herbert at this stage in his career?
Yes and no. Now, look, I'm not a big Jim Harbaugh guy, right? I wane with the Rain Man routine going back to when he was in San Francisco and, you know, like, I'm not a Jim Harbaugh guy. However, he does have the ability to change a culture, right? And I think that is an important thing. But I don't think he's surrounded Justin Herbert with the right pieces to be overly successful. That interior offensive line was one of the worst in football last year. They still have two pieces there that are big question marks for them. For the second straight year, he's revamped the entire running back room. We'll see what they do with Hampton, the rookie first-round draft pick, and then Najee Harris there as well. We'll see if it's significantly better than pieces his coaching staff had familiarity previously in Baltimore. But Ladd McConkey's a really good receiver, and then what? I'm not buying Quentin Johnson. And then, you lose a key piece along your defensive line last year. Now you've got to replace some pieces. So when you're Jim Harbaugh and you come back, you get to be heavily involved in roster construction, which a lot of head coaches have now. And I just don't know that he's done a good enough job building the roster to support Justin Herbert. Now, he's an empowering coach, right? People that played for him at Michigan and elsewhere have talked about that. And even last year, talking to Josh Palmer about the impact that he had. Like, he has the ability to empower, but you better build the roster. Otherwise, the rest of the act kind of wears thin a little bit. So we'll see.
You mentioned Najee Harris, former Pittsburgh Steeler. And right now in Pittsburgh, everybody is saying all the right things. Everybody's getting along. Aaron Rodgers loves where he's at. It's if I'm looking for personal enlightenment, Farhan, all I do is I turn on the NFL Network and just get the report from Steelers camp. What about week 4 or 5 if the Steelers are 1-4? Is it going to be the same situation where everybody's so in love with each other?
No, not at all. All right. Like it'll fingers will start getting pointed. Right. And, I think the culture under Mike Tomlin, which was so important there, has waned a little bit in the last couple of years, right? And then, they move on from George Pickens. And, it hasn't been as clean as it was before. And just the fact that he would allow the situation to take place the way he did with Aaron Rodgers to when he finally got signed after so much drama and attention, it was pissing off players, pissing off people in the community. So I think if they struggle early and the quarterback position struggles early, I think we're going to be right back where we were, right? And I'm not a big Russell Wilson guy, but I don't think he was terrible for this team last year, right? No. So when people talk about Aaron Rodgers getting back to peak Aaron Rodgers, I want to see if he can do what Russell Wilson did last year, which again wasn't amazing, but it was a lot better than what we've seen from Aaron Rodgers as a Jet. So, and that roster is limited. I think DK Metcalf is a limited player. Watched him closely throughout his time in Seattle. He's a guy that physically looks like a freak, but he rarely takes over games. And then he'll do things like take 15-yard penalties and things like that Mike Tomlin's not going to want to put up with. So, and there aren't a lot of weapons besides him on the offensive side of the ball. So I don't know that they're set up offensively to do great things. The defense is really good there, but I'm not sure the offense is going to keep its end of the bargain.
I just got back from vacation and we were in Hawaii. The number one team driving around, whether you're driving a 1995 Toyota Corolla or a 2025 Infiniti sport utility vehicle, a lot of people love the Raiders, and they will put those decals everywhere. I know that it's a resurgent, and they brought in Pete Carroll. Is there any hope for Raider fans that this thing gets turned around and they win more than 7 games?
7 is kind of where I'm at with them, and that's an improvement based on where they've been.
Yeah.
But the thought that this team is going to compete in the playoffs in this division, right? And when we were talking about the Chargers and Justin Herbert, right? The Chiefs aren't going anywhere. And, I know they won a lot of close games last year, but their offense is going to take a significant step forward again with the healthy receivers and things like that. Like, they're not going to be, if you think they're going to fall off, they're not. And the Broncos are totally headed in the right direction. I am buying the Broncos, especially with that defense. So it's going to be really hard. I think the Chargers are going to be a clear third, and I think the Raiders are again going to be a fourth. So can they get to 7 wins in that division? You talk about holes on a roster, right? Again, questions along the offensive line. They're going to have Ashton Genty, who I think is going to be a really good player. Brock Bowers, I love him at tight end. And then what? And defensively, you got Max Crosby, and then what? Right? Like, there are holes. So I get that Pete Carroll is Mr. Positivity and he can get the most out of that group, but you got to squeeze a lot of juice out of a very small orange if you're going to make some really tasty orange juice right there in Vegas. I think that roster of all the teams we've talked about in this segment, I think that roster's the worst.
Have you had to make any predictions? We'll wrap on this. Have you had to make any predictions? Who do you think your NFC team is in the Super Bowl this year? Is it the Eagles?
It's a good question. It's all going to come down to the health of Christian McCaffrey, if he can stay healthy all year. And they're being really careful with him, right? Now the 49ers have lost a lot of pieces, especially on the defensive side of the ball at all three levels of that defense, right? So, Bosa's going to need some help. Warner's going to need some help. Lenore in the secondary is going to need some help. But Christian McCaffrey can make a lot of things right for that team. So if he can play 17 games, and look, he hasn't done that, right, very often. And I think 3 of his 8 seasons, he's had less than 7, including last year. But I think they can make some noise in that division. I still think the AFC is significantly better. And then Washington, right? I mean, I don't want to be quick to write off Detroit, but they did lose both coordinators and they've lost some key pieces. So we'll see if they can take the next step. I really do believe Washington can. Really tough division. But, they won the Super Bowl in Philly. Jalen Hurts is only going to get better. Didn't lose pieces offensively. So I'm still going to take Philly to get back there.
Big play VA. Vernon Adams did not play last night for the Calgary Stampeders, and they're a different football team without him. The Ottawa Red Blacks capitalized on an opportunity. Ottawa's problems are not solved. Red Blacks fans, you won 31-11. It just goes to show, Farhan, without a starting quarterback in this league or any league, it's tough. Nothing against PJ Walker, but it was tough last night.
It was. 3 interceptions, not good enough. Other misses on would-be touchdowns. And then, the guys didn't necessarily help him, right? Dom Rhymes with a couple of drops. There were others as well.
Yep.
I know they were missing some other pieces of the receiving core. But, look, I get that that PJ Walker's had some pedigree, but it's a different game, right? And you don't just walk in and kill it when you're trying to figure out that 12th man. He hadn't looked comfortable, in his game last week. He didn't look comfortable in the preseason necessarily. So it's going to take some time, but at the end of the day, I don't know that he's going to get the time because I think VA is going to be back next week. But they were so close on so many plays that I just have to believe if Vernon Adams played that game yesterday, Calgary winds up winning without a doubt. And, and backup quarterback's an issue everywhere. And when you look at Calgary's situation, you feel good about it at the start that, hey, we got a guy like PJ Walker. This is a pretty good deal, but it's going to take some time across the board. I think Hamilton's got the best backup quarterback in the league in Taylor Powell. I really do. I think Sask probably second with Jake Mayer, who's serviceable as a game manager. But after that, every other team should be freaked out at the thought of losing their starting quarterback. It's a tough place to be right now.
The Riders win last week. We beat the Elks by 3 points. And now in Rider Nation, we're so confident we complain about winning by only 3 points. I want to ask you, I saw a little bit of a spark with that Elks team with Cody at quarterback. There were some elements there that you didn't see when you had Trey Ford. There was a little more continuity. There was a little bit, and you could see it. Did you see some things as well that would lead you to believe that the Elks can get a little better if Fajardo stays the starter?
Yeah, for sure, right? He will put that team farther ahead this year than Trey Ford will. And I think there's a bigger belief in that locker room with Cody Fajardo at the helm. The receivers know that, look, the ball's going to come where it needs to, on time. Defenders, even in practice, know that, the ball's not going to get there late. We've got to have a bit more sense of urgency. His preparation level, his experience, I think all of it matters. I think the room believes more. Now, look, there's a lot of holes on that team, right? I think in terms of receiving core, I think they've got the least dynamic receiving core in the league. They're not committed to running the football, right? Jordan McSimic needs to be more committed. The offensive line needs to be better. And defensively, they're not getting enough out of that high-priced defensive line, right? So there's a lot of areas on that team that need to improve. You can't just hang it on the quarterback. But Cody Fajardo, in the short term, absolutely makes them better. And you saw it last game, right? I mean, with no running game, he still managed 350 passing yards and kept his team in it.
Last week, I thought, I'm going to buy Hamilton Ticat stock if they can go into BC, and BC usually plays well at home, and win on the road. Because Hamilton's won at home, they play in the East, there's all of that. But for them to be a contender, and the way that they ended up winning that game, to me, I'm like, all right, I think the Ticats are for real, because if anything, the Ticats have been plagued with inconsistency. I'm sure Scott Milanovich would be the first one to say that. Were you impressed with what you saw to Hamilton last week to actually pull it together to get the win?
Yeah, for sure. There's no doubt. And I do think they're for real, right? Scott Milanovich has gotten Bo Levi Mitchell playing the best football of his career. I'm in Edmonton right now. I'm going to do play-by-play for the game tomorrow against with Hamilton and the Elks. And as I go through my rosters, the one thing I see a ton of is continuity, right? Like we talk about Kenny Lawler, but when you look at this roster, I think there's maybe 3 changes on either side of the ball. And they're just more comfortable playing together. Whereas you look at Edmonton and it's like everybody's in their first year with the Elks. When you look at Hamilton, these guys are comfortable now. So Brent Monson's doing some good work on the defensive side of the ball. He's simplified some things, but again, you've got 5 out of 6 defensive backs that are back from last year, and they're more comfortable just playing with one another. And some of the guys that are new have played together in previous stops under Brent Monson, so they're comfortable with the system. They're maximizing their pass rush. They play from ahead, right, which is a great way to live because you know you don't have to deal with running. You don't have to deal with rushing attacks when you do that. You know, it just kind of controls what you see on both sides of the ball. So, you know, when Bo was in Calgary on a regular basis, like he was told where to go with the ball. He got the ball out of his hands extremely quickly. Here, watching him navigate the offense and make reads down the field and then eventually check it down to his underneath option, you know, that wasn't stuff he had to do before. So he's being asked to do things that are much more difficult right now, and he's doing it at a really, really high level. So, and when you looked at what BC did last week, where they just committed everything to Kenny Lawler, and then other guys like Keandre Smith and Tim White beat them, right? So they've got some depth in places that we didn't know they had it.
6-1 Saskatchewan Roughriders in Montreal tomorrow to take on the 5-2 Alouettes, and it's the return of Sean Lemon. There's no shortage of storylines. Noel Thorpe, to me, because he's been doing it for so long, for so many years, the best defensive coordinator in the league. If you're Noel Thorpe, what are you doing to attack the Riders? Because the Riders at times have been able to score at will. Not necessarily in the fourth quarter of games, but in the first 3.
Yeah, there's no doubt, right? And Trevor Harris, another guy at an advanced age that's playing the best football of his career, right? I'm picking the Riders in this game. You know, just because I think they've got a sizable quarterback advantage, and Montreal's still dealing with injuries, especially on the offensive side of the ball. Lemon will give them a boost for sure, but, you know, McLeod Bethel-Thompson's going to have to kind of go toe-to-toe. Now, I think the other thing that's probably underplayed is that they're not going to be able to play Sam Emilus this week, right? He's banged up again, and I think that takes something away from the receiving corps. It's unfortunate that they've got Sean Bain ready to go, but they're not going to play him because of ratio reasons, right? So, you know, that's going to take away a little bit, right? Because Noel Thorpe likes to pressure, and Trevor Harris is great at recognizing. He's great at getting the ball out of his hands early and going and attacking that pressure with pressure. So I think Trevor gives him a best chance, but I think his receiving corps is a little bit depleted, having to go with, you know, Tommy Neal over a guy like Sam Emilus.
Farhan Lalji from TSN. Who's your color partner tomorrow? If you are doing the Ticat Elk game, who's your color guy tomorrow?
It's Lapo and I, and we're going to totally like coach geek out, right? Because when we do that, it's constant analysis. So I'm going to try to make sure we stay in storytelling mode because, you know, he's the worst for me. I love Lapo, but because he's a coach, I'm going to have to pull it back. Normally, I dip into the other side whenever I get play-by-play games. I'm not going to do that with Lapo.
Last question, and then we'll let you go because we're running out of time. Is Luke Wilson part of your broadcast tomorrow? Will he be blowing up your game or our game tomorrow in Montreal?
I think he's doing tonight's game. Luke is generally a part of Friday Night Football, so tomorrow's Saturday's game. So we'll probably get our Luke fix tonight. And I'm a fan. I know people in Saskatchewan aren't. I get the biggest criticisms about Luke Wilson from the people of Saskatchewan, but Luke loves the league and the people in it more than you probably realize.
All right. Have a great night and a great call tomorrow. We'll be excited as a CFL doubleheader.